In this episode, we'll discuss Trump's assassination attempt.
There is no chance that Donald Trump's allowing himself to be shot in the ear.
An Eminem diss.
Oh, like Slim Shady's so tough. I think I could beat Eminem up in a fight.
Crime and conspiracy theories.
Dinosaurs, that seems pretty fake and gay.
Candace Owens, welcome to the Jack Neel Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jack Neel.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. So Candace, I would call you a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but under the context that most, if not all, conspiracy theories turn out to be true.
Right.
Donald Trump was almost murdered a few days ago. Who do you think is responsible?
I'm going to go with Deep State for $400, Alex. And it's interesting because I had Alex Jones on my podcast and I hadn't seen him in a long time. And when I first got into politics, a lot of the stuff that Alex Jones was saying, like when you first get into politics, like you want to stay away from Alex Jones. Like he's a conspiracy theorist. And then because I'm naturally very curious and I began researching stuff and learning a lot about the CIA, and the scales just fell from my eyes, essentially just recognizing that everything that you learn in public school was a lie. And you can look this up. You don't need to go down a rabbit hole. Like this, the declassification of what the CIA has been involved in is on Wikipedia, but you wouldn't just normally look for that, right? You would think, oh, I learned about the CIA and the FBI, and you learn in school that these are the good guys and they're fighting the bad guys. And then when you realize, oh, wait, they've been experimenting on people and they've been trying and successfully turning individuals into Manchurian candidates. So when you see these quote unquote lone shooters, it's incumbent upon people to understand that it is not a conspiracy theory when someone asks the question of whether or not this person was turned into a Manchurian candidate. For those of you that aren't familiar with the film is based on actual CIA experimentation with psychologically inducing someone to commit murder. And they do that with a variety of methods. So there's obviously just the psychology of brainwashing someone to commit the act of murder, but also with the combination of drugs. So when we ask that question of what drugs were these people on when they committed these murders, it's a very important question that we never get the answer to. And many of those people could have, in fact, been Manchurian candidates. So I personally believe that what happened was, especially because we're getting like no questions about how it is possible that the Secret Service knew for 26 minutes that this individual was in the realm, that the government was involved. The deep state government, so to speak, was involved.
Do you think there's any validity at all, to take it from the other side for a second, that maybe Trump was trying to make his campaign more valid and it was fake rounds? He had a blood pod, ducked down, placed it on his ear. That's just one of the conspiracies I've heard to make it look more valid. Is there any validity to that?
I think what's interesting is that both sides are actually agreeing on one thing, which is that this situation is not right. This was not some lone person who got on a route and allowed this to go. So that's actually what's ironic, is we're in radical disagreement, but agreement that what happened was in fact staged. Yeah. Now, people who don't like Trump are saying, oh, it was staged and Trump was in on it. Those people just don't know Trump. There is no chance that Donald Trump's allowing himself to be shot in the ear and would trust that this young person was going to miss his head, but just hit his ear. Yeah. Absolutely not. Like, that's insane. Like he would have to be, just an absolute, who would, and give me any person who feels so confident to trust this person that it has no shooting skills to look through a scope and shoot at the exact right moment, who's not like a sharp tactical shooter. That's crazy talk.
So let's talk about the shooter. So 20-year-old Thomas Crooks, if you look at his Wikipedia, it says he didn't make his high school shooting team due to poor aim.
Yeah, and Trump was like, yeah, totally. Aim at my ear and I'll turn around at the exact moment and let you do that. Yeah.
I think it's funny that that detail was even included. It seems like, to me, I was talking about this with friends, and we were like, I think most normal people who don't question things would be like, oh, that makes sense why he missed, because he didn't make his high school shooting team. Right?
Right.
Well, what also makes sense to me is that 2 years ago, he was featured in a BlackRock commercial. I was wondering if you had seen some of the theories around that.
Yeah. And it's always, again, the same suspects. I find it also of interest. And I have been on my podcast. I know tons of people listen to my podcast, encouraging everybody who thinks that any of this sounds crazy, because maybe you are just coming out of the public school system and you actually don't know about some of the evil that our government has been involved in, has actually not been involved in the past, has always been involved in. There's never been a period in American history where the FBI and the CIA were not corrupt agencies that were intentionally killing Americans. There's a book called Chaos, which I always say that once you get through that, you will understand what we're dealing with and why we're talking about these things, where it talks about MK Ultra and these experiments that they were just imparting upon regular Americans who had no idea, people that were being drugged with LSD, trying to implant false memories into American troops' minds, successfully getting an American troop who has no memory of it to commit murder of rape and murder. And he got the electric chair. This actually happened under a doctor named Dr. Leslie Jolly, who then watched his execution. This is really scary stuff that we're talking about, but you have to kind of confront that evil. And so for me, what was interesting, having understood that whenever there are psychologists or therapists involved, you should ask questions, learning that his two parents were both behavioral therapists. Is that correct?
Both of them. Yeah.
Both of them. Behavioral therapists. I find it odd that rather than speaking out, the first thing that they say is like, we give one statement to CNN to just say we're working with authorities. Like, why'd you pick CNN? We know as a fact that the government has had the mainstream media on payroll since JFK was killed. Operation Mockingbird. Again, this is a declassified operation that was never discontinued. You can find this on Wikipedia, where they were concerned about the narrative surrounding JFK's assassination. Why would they be so concerned? Well, because they were involved in it. And they wanted to make sure, and this is when the term conspiracy theory first entered the American lexicon, they started calling everyone who didn't agree with the Warren Commission report a conspiracy theorist. So psychology is the name of the game. And you have to be, the only way that you defeat mass psychosis and mass lies, mass manipulation, is to understand that they know how to create a mass psychosis. And they know what the public will believe. And actually what the government policy is, you can even see this in Hitler's Mein Kampf, the bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe it. Because it confounds for example, I'll give you an example here. It actually requires more to believe, like if I was like, the moon landing is a hoax, well, people go, there's just no way that could be you're telling me. So that if it is a hoax, the bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe it, because people just cannot process that someone would lie that big. This kind of gets into like when you find out a guy is like living a whole double life and you're like, how did his wife not know? It's like, well, actually requires more to believe that your husband is capable of this evil of having an entire second family than it would for you to believe a small lie, you know? So they've done those experiments. They've had entire institutes dedicated to exploring, are people more likely to believe a big lie or a small lie? And the proof that they determined is that people are more likely to believe a big lie, which is crazy.
Well, I'll let our viewers put two and two together about a big lie that happened recently that was maybe pushed in 2020.
You can't talk about it on certain things, right?
I think it'll probably risk both of us getting deplatformed. So
where's this going? This interview. YouTube, you're safe to talk about the COVID times.
The COVID times. I think I'll probably stray away from COVID on this one, but we'll get into some other conspiracies in a moment. First, I want to talk about something slightly more lighthearted. So last year, after Eminem sent a cease and desist to Vivek Ramaswamy, you criticized his age and speculated about his sexuality. Quote, as people get older, they often become grayer, and in Eminem's case, gayer. A few days ago, Eminem made a diss track on you. What are your thoughts on the lyrics?
I think I don't have an issue with it. I'm totally fine with it. I just appreciate that he's 51 years old and he's still doing the same thing to be relevant. Like, he's trying to figure out whoever is being talked about a lot, and then he just kind of puts a diss track so that it gets a bunch of headlines. It's just like, it's tired, you know? And for me, I only find artists to be interesting when they're evolving. And that's why on my podcast, when I covered it, I was just like, he's like a kid now. Like, I loved him when I was 13. And it was like, oh, he's doing and saying things that no one would say, and he's different and he's pushing the barrier. But now I'm like, you're Haley that you used to rap about on the track, who was like a little girl, now just got married. Like, you should be preparing to be a grandfather, and you're still kind of doing the same thing. Like, you know, finding women that you can speak about on your albums so that you can create drama, so that you can sell records. It's just tired, you know? He's not hard. He's not scary. Maybe I thought when I was younger, like, oh, like Slim Shady's so tough. And now I'm like, I just feel like I could beat him up. You know what I mean? I think I could beat Eminem up in a fight. That's how I feel now. Yeah. And so I wasn't offended by it. Like, go out, making music about me. And some people were like, oh, isn't it an honor? Like, he's such a known rapper. I'm like, it would have been an honor if he was in his prime. Now it just feels like, it feels a little desperate, you know?
Yeah. Do you have any response to him, or do you feel?
Should I drop a track?
I think you'd be pretty good at it.
I really should, before? Right? Yeah, I should drop a track. I think you're right. That's the only way to respond in a rap battle. You'd be the first person to
probably beat Eminem.
Right. Yeah. A politician, somebody in politics just like drops a track against Eminem. I think I have to do it. But yeah, he's also known to be a recluse. He's quite strange and odd. He's a bit of an oddball. And yeah, there's just
You don't
nothing.
get that good at something without dedicating all of your life to it. You know?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if Eminem, we thought he was so good because we were so young, or if he's actually talented. All I know is that I'm just not interested in him. Like, I just don't find anything about what he's doing to be interesting. He hasn't evolved. He's not adding anything to the dialogue. There's so much going on right now in the world. I mean, Cat Williams is like infinitely more interesting right now.
Yeah, I agree.
Speaking out about issues in Hollywood and like what's actually happening behind the scenes. And then you just have like Eminem, who's like still living in 2001.
Where does this sense of white guilt among celebrities, artists, and influencers come from?
Well, Hollywood decides what you have to be, and they do it, right? So in Hollywood, these political, like far left trends are always what they're going to follow. And when BLM kind of exploded onto the scene, it was just fashionable, and they're always trying to be trendy. Like they think they're deep, but they're actually the most shallow people in the world, right? They don't comprehend anything. For them, it's all about likes. It's all about what's the most popular thing to do. I mean, somebody kind of put it into perspective that a lot of people look at actors and actresses and they're like, oh my gosh, they're so cool. They're so amazing. But in reality, these are just, if you want to look relative to your high school experience, these are drama kids, right? I'm just saying that.
Yeah.
I'm just factually speaking. These are the drama kids. And then they were like in the drama club and they got made it to Hollywood and they got to keep acting and they got to keep performing. But they're the drama kids that get to play and pretend that they're cool. And so that popularity means everything to them, because actually when they were in high school, they weren't that popular.
Yeah.
And so they will say whatever it is that they think is popular, because they actually don't have the courage to lead, right? And so what they do is they go, okay, well, in order for me to maintain this popularity that I now have, that's been awarded to me because I'm in Hollywood and I'm in this movie and people think I'm cool and people think I'm hot, I'm going to say whatever the current thing is. And so they just oscillate between the current thing is white guilt. Oh, how could you not post a black square? I mean, so shallow, shallow, which is why they never talk extensively about these topics. They're always just doing things like dropping an album about Candace or saying a couple of words about Candace on stage, because they don't have the ability to actually converse and think through why they believe what they believe. It's just all performative.
So Candace, to be frank, I was actually asked to promote your crime show last year on my TikTok. And it was probably one of the first like legitimate brand deals that I denied, because I was scared of the repercussions of being associated with someone with your beliefs.
Right.
Now I have you on my podcast and willing to promote whatever you want to promote. But I kind of asked myself, like, the risk to reward ratio to kind of put yourself in conservative politics for most influencers, creatives, isn't really there. You know, you get ostracized from brands. There's like a schism of your own audience, and you have the risk of getting deplatformed. How do you think we can change this?
Well, I hope that I'm already a part of the change, because I'm showing people that you can survive it. Like, you know, all you have to do is have courage. Literally, you just have to have courage, and you have to have that perspective that actually there is nothing that is more loserish than saying what you know is not true, or saying what you don't actually believe simply because it's trendy, because you want money. Like, literally, that's someone buying your friendship. What's nerdier than that? Like, I can make you say whatever, here's a buck.
Yeah.
I don't want that. Like, I just think that's the most uncool thing in the entire world. And I think the more people that have the audacity to say, I'm not doing that, and I don't care what the social repercussions are going to be, other people will see it and they will realize, actually, that's the cool person. Like, the person who is saying what they actually believe and are willing to debate what they actually think and are establishing morals that I believe yields a better society.
Yeah.
I think courage inspires courage. And so those sponsorships, those deals, those advertisers, you will find them. I believe that it is more difficult to follow the path of goodness. Like I always say, because, you know, I'm a Christian, the devil's money is always easy. It's right there. It's like, you know, just say the thing and you'll have money and you'll have sponsorships and everything's going to be amazing. But you will realize that what comes with that is that you're selling a piece of your soul. And you have to go to sleep every night knowing that you're a sellout. Like, at the end of the day, like, they can give you sponsorships, give you deals, you can say the thing, but you go to bed at night and you know.
That's the real contract, to selling your soul. That's what Andrew Tate says. He says, selling your soul as a brand deal,
Yeah.
you know, and the restrictions they put around that. It's really interesting.
And that, could you imagine like every night going to bed? That's why I think, wow, these people in Hollywood are losers. You go to bed every night and you know you're a fraud. I could never live like that. But you follow the truth and you will be shocked at, because you had the strength to overcome that challenge, God then will reward you. It's like, oh, it's like a test that God wants to, you're going to take the easy money. Are you going to do that thing? Or are you going to follow the way, the truth, and the light and say what is real? And you're not going to get things perfect. Sometimes you're going to get things wrong, but at least you go to bed knowing like I'm a real human being. I'm a real person. And I wasn't molded to say and do things that I knew were wrong simply because I was being offered cash.
Yeah. Before we talk about more conspiracy theories, I do want to touch a bit on your previous crime show. Do you plan on releasing any new shows around crime, maybe one about around conspiracies themselves?
You know, it's funny because I was just looking at, somebody had commented and said Candace should do a whole series on history that's been untold. Like everything.
I saw that today. I thought that was a great idea.
I did think it was a good idea. And so maybe.
Because you don't have that. You don't have the chronological history from the beginning from
right.
Someone's point of view like yours, you know?
Right, exactly. Being like, here's what you were told about Pearl Harbor. Here's what actually happened. Like, here's what you were told about this event, like the Charles Manson murders. Like I was like falling down the rabbit hole reading Chaos. And here's what actually happened. Like factually, here's the stuff that you never were taught in school. Like, here's what you were told about the war in Afghanistan. Here's what actually happened. I think that would be really cool to do an American history series, like through almost like a real public education.
Yeah.
And just doing it maybe on TikTok.
Candace Owens crash course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Great idea.
I think that'd be really interesting. I do want to ask you about crime generally, though. Do you think serial killers are born or created?
I think they're created. I know they're created. And that's why I say that that is that one book you have to read, because then now I'm extremely suspicious if there's ever been a serial killer that came from like a military family. They were doing these experiments on troops, on military men, on army bases. And it's funny because I haven't looked into this further, but because I read that book, I then started looking at like every serial killer. And the first one that came to mind obviously was Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah. And he was a son of of somebody that his father was a military man. So I was like, okay, I need to now go revisit that and relearn, because they were trying to see if they could breed serial killers. There were experiments done to see how you can create a psychopath. I mean, really scary stuff that our CIA was dabbling in the 60s, and to success. Like they wrote letters to each other saying that we have successfully figured out how to install false memories, you know, how to inspire someone to murder, how to brainwash them. And there are people that are in prison, people that have been killed because they were just experimented on. Case in point, the Unabomber. Yeah. He was an MK Ultra candidate, which is really scary.
What's really sad about that, if you think about their incentive structures, they might have developed systems to kind of create these psychopaths, but maybe not to rehabilitate them.
Because there's no way. I don't think there is a way to.
Really?
I think once you've been MK Ultra, so to speak, there is no way to come back. Like that book revealed that Jacob Rubenstein, who's the guy who shot JFK, he was MK Ultra. Like Dr. Leslie paid him a visit in prison, and then the next day when he appeared in front of the judge, he was legally insane. Yeah. And the judge called it out and said, well, I saw him yesterday. He was totally fine. What happened? Clearly something happened to him. You don't come back from it because what they use a cocktail of medicine. And it's interesting because I actually heard this first from Kanye West. Yeah. He told me years ago, before I was like in or understood that this could be a plausibility. He kept saying that like they gave me a mental disorder. Like they put me on a Psych 5150 hold and they did this to me. And this gets into Britney Spears conspiracy theories. All of that seemed crazy to me until I read this book and read it with my own eyes, that they said that they could give people schizophrenia, that they could give people bipolar disorder. If you can just elicit a mental disorder and you see these celebrities and they're being controlled and suddenly they say something and get out of line, they put them on a Psych 5150 hold, you got to ask questions of what's actually happening. And so it gave credence to things that Kanye had told me years ago that I wouldn't say I didn't believe them. I just didn't have it. I couldn't comprehend them. I didn't have the information to comprehend them. And it sounds crazy to an outsider of Hollywood to think that something like that could be going on within Hollywood.
I think that sounds very realistic.
Yeah, now it does to me.
Yeah.
But I guess I was just a little baby a few years ago and I just did not comprehend.
Yeah, when I was in Kentucky, I was like, oh, I'm sure it's not that bad. And then you move here and you're like, oh, I wonder why. Like my parents were like, oh, don't move to Hollywood and be an actor. Like maybe they knew something about it. But, Uh, so Trump says if he becomes president, he'll release the Epstein files, the JFK assassination files, the 9/11 attacks. Do you think the CIA killed JFK?
Yes.
100%?
110%. Though there's no other reason that you would lock down the files for decades. There's just no reason. And then they tried to kind of do this like slow release a couple of years ago, and they were like, maybe Russia did it. I'm like, if Russia sat a sitting US president, we would have gone to war in the 60s when he was shot. And again, they wouldn't have MK Ultra'd the guy, Jacob Rubenstein, if there wasn't something to hide. So the CIA did that. They had him visited in his cell by a Dr. Jolly West, and then had him given whatever cocktail it is of drugs that inspire clinical insanity. And then he couldn't stand trial.
I want to go more into the moon landing, actually. You called the moon landing the Easter Bunny for adults, which I think is hilarious, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, that. I love that we're talking about this because so what's funny is a lot of people, like, we just have good, like, you have your instinct. I always say, like, your gut is divine. Like that, somebody tells you something and you just go, doesn't really make sense, right? I don't really know. But then suddenly psychology, what they've realized, and this goes back to Sigmund Freud and then Edward Bernays, who was considered the father of propaganda in America, who was Sigmund Freud's nephew. They realize that if you just keep saying to someone something, it becomes true. And again, the bigger of a lie, people will believe it. And so what we have is what Scott Adams refers to as the non-expert problem. So your gut tells you, like, sounds pretty crazy that we went to the moon all these times for a couple of years, and then we just didn't go back forever, and we were just like done. Like, that sounds weird. And where's the technology? And they didn't even have cell phones. And like, you're telling me this, they live streamed this and there was a phone call. I don't know, like, it just seems like a little weird for like 1969. But you're like, but I don't really understand kind of outer space. Yeah. So I'm not going to debate this, but my gut tells me this is all BS. Like, that was where I was. And then what's interesting is, like, Bill Maher made fun of me for this, like, a little tweet that I said that, I don't know, the moon landing just seems weird. And whenever the media, like, tries to make you feel like you're stupid, that's usually, for me, like, the first breadcrumb that, like, you're onto something, because that's what they are trained to do. They're trained to sit here and tell you, you're ridiculous, you don't believe this. So then I decided to read this document. It was 119 pages. And I know there's a book too, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. And he just broke down the science in a way that was very digestible. So I didn't have a non-expert problem. And so there's a basic thing that you guys can do. If you're like somebody who's like, it had to have happened, the moon landing, what you can do is look up, I'm calling this the firmament, but it's the, what is the belt, the 200 miles out, you hit the...
Asteroid belt? No.
Van Allen belt. Okay, so there's a Van Allen belt. So we have never gone beyond that belt, right? There's been no human that's gone beyond that belt since the moon landings, allegedly. And not even Elon Musk, when they go out to space, they have to stay, like, there is a space station, but like once you get 200 miles out, you hit the Van Allen belt, which has an incredible amount of radiation. NASA has said, like, in order for us to get through it, we'd have to have cement blocks around someone. So I want you to just Google, if you're watching this, the temperature of the Van Allen belt. Okay, just Google that. And you're going to get something like, at the lowest points in the Van Allen belt, it's, I think, 3,000 Kelvin. And at the highest points, it's like 30,000 Kelvin. And then I want you to Google what material the shuttle was made out of. And then I want you to Google at what temperature
that would burn.
That would just burn. And you're just going to laugh out loud. You go, this literally doesn't make sense that an aluminum alloy could have gone through the Van Allen belt for an hour and a half or 59 minutes. It just couldn't have happened. It literally can't happen. There's no explanation for it. They just don't even talk about it. They don't like talking about the Van Allen belt because that part makes entirely no sense. And then he went through and he spoke about, like, the camera. So they allegedly took camera. I want you to Google the temperature of the moon. Okay. They had their big bulky gloves on. They took these cameras and just go, hey, what camera is that from 1969 that was able to survive temperatures of like 250 degrees Fahrenheit to like negative 250 degrees Fahrenheit, just like on the moon while they were just like jumping around. And you're going to go, where's this camera? Then Google's going to tell you, oh, actually, they only made 8 of those cameras and they decided to give them, you're going to love this, to a guy who makes movies. I'm blanking on the name of this guy who just a couple of years before the moon landing, he's a famous director. He made a movie about outer space. What's it? Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, he has them?
A movie director. He got them. So we can't look at those. That technology's been lost.
Yeah,
Stanley
yeah, yeah.
Kubrick, though, used it when he shot the movie 2 years prior. It's like he obviously shot this like fake set moon landing. Why would you give them to him? Stanley
This sounds like
Kubrick.
the Church of Scientology shit.
It's just like
what did the guy do before that? He was a science fiction writer and
Mhm.
wrote about something almost identical to what the creed of the Church of Scientology is.
Right.
You know? And it's
But
like,
do you know who he was friends with?
who was he friends
Oh
with?
my gosh, this is amazing. You don't know this. So he was friends with Jack Parsons, who established the Apollo program for NASA. So those two were friends. They were out in LA and they literally worshipped Satan. They were both Aleister Crowley recipients. So they were considered, the religion was called Thelema. They believed that they could create the they read, like basically Aleister Crowley was a Satanist, the most well-known Satanist of the time. And he basically, when he was a kid, he read the Bible, read Revelation, read about the whore of Babylon, which would like conquer the nations, and got inspired by the whore of Babylon and created a religion about that, which was called Thelema. And his protege was Jack Parsons. He was the creator of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which became the Apollo program. So Jack Parsons was a committed Satanist, and they would have sex rituals. And it was him and the founder of Scientology, Ron Hubbard.
L. Ron Hubbard, yeah.
Yes, the founder of Scientology. They were out here in Pasadena, and both of them were, every time that they would light a fuse to see if the rocket would go, they would say satanic chants. Here's what's so crazy. Any of this sounds nuts, don't go find it on Reddit. You don't have to go on a deep rabbit hole. It's on Wikipedia. Look up Jack Parsons on Wikipedia. All of this information is right there. They were literal Satanists. And then they established after this the Apollo program. And it was born of Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley. They even tried to impregnate a woman without having sex, with just their sexual rituals and their chanting and their satanic chants. They thought that they could impregnate a virgin.
Yeah.
And they called this baby, she eventually did get pregnant. Nobody knows how. They called it the moon child.
Yeah.
Suddenly NASA says, oh, we're going to the moon, and we got there. And these people that wanted to conquer the nations via deception established the Apollo program. I don't know.
Yeah.
Might be a little shady. So I went from being like, my gut tells me this just didn't happen, to then just going, okay, this is like ridiculous. It is, okay.
It's also ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous.
You look at the founder of Planned Parenthood, for instance. It's like she was a eugenicist, right?
She was, yep.
It's like,
Hidden in plain sight. Another one where they teach you she's like a hero when you're in school, and then you read her writings, and she literally wrote about birth control propaganda because these people understood. That was one of her papers, because she was an avid writer, and she was published in a lot of periodicals and magazines at that time. And she wrote an article called Birth Control Propaganda. And it was all about, okay, well, we are trying to make it so women can't have babies. We are trying to make them infertile. How are we going to get these women to ingest this medicine and ingest these pills? Well, we have to come up with propaganda. And this is where the my body, my choice, reproductive health. And so to hear these women, this woman was so evil. When you read her writings about how people are unfit to be able to reproduce, how she was worried about preserving the Nordic race. When you read her writings, then you see women today with the crazed look in their eye, like, my body, my choice. I call her the most successful feminist that ever existed, because everything she wanted to accomplish, she wrote about it.
Yeah.
It's right there. And women don't know that. And they are like birth control stands until they get to my age. And then a bunch of women are having trouble having children. And you're like, yeah, well, they literally created that with that in mind, to make you infertile. So you might want to revisit the history of all of the birth control that you're taking.
You said there were some things about vaccines leading to infertility as well, right?
Yeah. And that, again, is explicitly stated. I do not vaccinate my children after I gratefully was injured by the Gardasil vaccine. I say gratefully because it was my wake-up call to vaccines, and I don't know that I would have ever come about it in a different way. And the Gardasil vaccine, when it was being propagandized to women to get it, we were basically told that it will stop you from getting cancer, like ovarian cancer or cervical cancer. I can't remember which one. And so I passed out in the office, got injured. And then when I did my research, I was shocked at how much of an absolute lie everything they told us was. And I looked at the commercials, and, you know, don't want your kid to die of cancer, knowing that you could have prevented it. Everything was a lie, and the scales fell from my eyes. And then I went, okay, if they're doing it with this vaccine, is it possible it was the other ones as well? Did more research, and then became a proud anti-vaxxer. And so the name calling is a part of the psychological conditioning. They know that you don't want to feel isolated. So to make people feel isolated, they call you a conspiracy theorist. They call you an anti-vaxxer. And so people will get into line, will literally get into a psychosis formation simply because they're afraid of being called a name. So I embrace it. I'm like, yeah, I'm an anti-vaxxer. You got me. You got me. My kids aren't vaxxed. Ooh. And they don't know what to do with that. That scares them when someone knows how the psychology works, when someone has done the research and is unbothered by it. Because if that psychology starts to catch of people being emboldened by true knowledge and not by a fear of rejection and not by a fear, an unwarranted fear that your children are going to die, they can't constantly tell you're going to die and force you to do things without your understanding, they lose all power.
It's interesting how they kind of coin these terms and then generalize them and make them broader and broader over time. Like like the term vaccine is very broad now. Like it used to mean a different thing than it does now. And then I don't know, like the term homophobic. Don Lemon accused you of being homophobic, and you're like, what does that mean? I'm scared of you? Yeah, and he's like, well, no, it means like that you don't like me. It's like, well, that's not really what the term means.
Phobia. Like I don't like. I'm not scared to see two men holding hands. And again, but he was playing those psychology games in the interview of like, well, she's not going to want to be called a homophobe or a transphobe. And then when he realized I didn't care, he had no cards. He just didn't know what to do with someone who has the audacity to stand by what they know to be true.
It's interesting. The conspiracies that we've been talking about so far, there's a lot of incentive structures, like reasons that the government would want to push these narratives for their own benefit. But one that you talked about, and you haven't gone into it too much in depth, but you don't believe dinosaurs are real.
So this is a funny one. So this is one of the ones where I'm like, I'm not kidding. This conversation happened and it was so funny. I was just walking with Savannah, my manager, because we do like these little evening walks. And I just looked up to her and I was like, dinosaurs, that seems pretty fake and gay. She's like, Savannah's from Tennessee. She's like, I've never believed in dinosaurs. Like literally, everyone thinks there's like some conspiracy behind it. I was like, that was how it started. And I was like, what on earth? You rawr. I'm like, it's funny because people will literally say they don't believe in God, but then tell them like dinosaurs aren't real and they fall apart. Like, I'm like, okay, so they're just roaming the planet. And I was like, that's really interesting. But then because I got into and very much subscribe and believe and know to be true that there is a Christ conspiracy that's happening right now, which is the intentional removal of Christ because they want people not to believe in God, but instead to believe in humans. Well, that is what evolutionary theory was about. Because rather than making human beings believe that they had a creator, there was no concept of a dinosaur until 1850. That's very recent, right? That's the first time they were like, we actually think that there were these reptiles that are roaming the planet. And then within that same decade, they were like dinosaur bones. And they started finding them everywhere. I'm like, okay, so nobody found this. And then like
Really?
Suddenly there's entire museums. And in China, they have actually been caught manufacturing dinosaur bones many times over. And it is the case that dinosaur bones, for whatever reason, are always just found by the paleontologist. Like, it's not like you and me walking outside. I'm like, hey, a dinosaur bone. And, or by somebody who's related to a paleontologist. It's very strange. But anyways, I don't know for sure.
But you think the incentive structure there is to move away from God?
Well, they want you to believe that God isn't real, that like the theory of evolution, like you're an ape. What happened was just over time, like you used to be a little chimpanzee, but then with time, this is why you learned about theory of evolution, Homo sapien, Australopithecus, but then we were Homo erectus, and now you're a human being.
Isn't that the definition of Satanism?
Yeah.
Like to believe that like Earth is the kingdom, kind of?
Yes, and that is what these people were pushing. And so once you start to realize that Satanism is real, that these people who created everything that we view in Western society to be real believed in Satan, right? They know God's real, and yet they're convincing everyone that God isn't. And so when you speak to people that are super rational out of school, you're like, well, the evolutionary theory makes sense. So it makes sense to you that you started as a chimpanzee. Like, that's a faith, buddy. It makes sense to you. And if you say to them, like, of course you went to the moon, then you start talking about basic science, but they don't actually know. They can't talk to you about Van Allen belt. They don't know anything. It's a faith. Like, they have asserted, and what's interesting, even that, going to the moon, the Bible talks about a firmament. And if the firmament in the Bible, if you look at that, you would go, okay, well, it says that as below, so above, and this is how God created it. So if the Bible is real, which I know in my heart to be true, there's no way we got past this firmament. But it's interesting because, yeah, once you start to realize that all of it is about countering everything that is in the Bible, right? You have a creator. No. Evolutionary theory is real, actually. What happened was a meteor hit, and I don't know, like the meteor hit and wiped out the dinosaurs, but then like the lizards came. I don't even really, when you get down to even just thinking about that, you're like, okay, so it wiped out the dinosaurs. And then what happened? They're like, well, then the amoeba was around, but then like little lizards are from that. I actually don't, I have a lot of questions. I wish I was in 6th grade again, because they tell us all this stuff like dinosaurs are like when you're in 2nd grade, and guys are like, yeah, guys are the hardest about the dinosaurs. They are dinosaur stands.
I love dinosaurs growing up.
I know, boys love it. It's like a culture. So when I said this on my show, I was like, dinosaurs are fake and gay. My producer, all the boys were like, no, you've taken it too far. I will quit this show. It was really funny. I was like, oh, it's so sweet. You guys love your dinosaur still. And my son loves his dinosaur. But it is interesting that like they kind of drop it after 2nd grade. Like they take you to the Natural History Museum, and then there's no more talk about dinosaurs like later on in school. And they understand that children's minds are malleable. But when you get older, you might ask some questions. Like I would have a lot of questions now if I was sitting in 2nd grade and they were like, and a great big meteor hit and then all the dinosaurs went away. I would be like, oh, okay, but then what happened? Then what happened? And I don't think that we...
Do you think that's the higher-ups' attempt to maybe get us used to the idea of a mass extinction event?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And it very much empowers the fear that people have in like climate change. And well, this could happen again, or if we don't get this right. And ultimately, what are they doing? Drawing you more towards the idea that a creator is not real, but ultimate governance is real. So you have to make sacrifices. Don't think about God being real. If you want to stay alive, what are you going to sacrifice to government? Okay, well, you can't use oil. I mean, you can't use gasoline and petrol. You're going to have to drive electric cars, Well, we've got to reduce the temperature by this and by that. And you see that is a religion. And these people will call themselves atheists. And I'm like, you guys have a deeper faith than anything I've ever known. These people, when the government says mask up, save lives, let your parents die alone, they listen. Mm-hmm. They listen, and they laugh at the Catholics. Like, oh, you believe in the sacraments. I'm like, homie, okay, you believe in things that are so utterly absurd. I mean, during COVID, if the government had said, hop on one foot, that's the only way you're going to stay alive, you would have seen mofos. Like,
I mean, the 6 feet thing was really funny.
Of course, like common sense, that just sounded stupid. And again, it's the intuition. Can I explain why that sounds stupid in scientific terms, science, which I think has become a faith? No, I just have this intuition. I think God gives you your intuition. That's the Holy Spirit, that this is really stupid. And yet you saw people get in line. So I believe that the cult of science, the people that deem themselves atheists, have just had this terrible thing happen where they have transferred their innate faith and they've given it to ultimate government. And that's what the government's all about. They want you to believe in the government for every solution in your life, and not to know that you are a spiritual being. Yeah. God is real. You have a creator. You are going to meet your creator one day. And humans, you are not your own God.
Candace, do you believe that Michelle Obama is trans?
So this is what's so crazy. I actually never looked into that conspiracy theory because I was on the left then. When Obama won, I like cried. I didn't vote for him, but I was just like, oh my gosh, like racism's going to be solved. Like all of the things. And of course, when I heard them trying to say she was a man, reading the articles, I was just like, these insane people. Like, how could they do this? Or I bought into all the rhetoric. It's just because she's, a first lady who's Black. And so I genuinely can't say that I believe in that because I had never looked into it. But I do very much know that Emmanuel Macron's wife is a man. And that was the explosion. They freaked out when I spoke about that in France. That's a man. Like Brigitte Macron is a man. And any person that reads the 6-part series that was produced by Xavier Poussard, investigating this for 3.5 years, will come out of it recognizing that that's a man. Not only is that a man, but that is someone who statutorily raped Emmanuel Macron when he was a 14-year-old boy, which is terrifying. And it leads to a broader question, which is why would the government try to protect that secret? Speaking of Brigitte Macron, and the answer is because it is true that politicians are blackmailed. And because it becomes a way to control politicians, to control how they vote. There was an entire blackmail ring happening, not only in Hollywood, but happening in DC. And I just recognize that to be so.
Yeah. Well, I guess, do you believe it though?
I don't know.
What does your gut say?
Well, I guess what my gut would say is that everything is plausible. Everything that I would normally, like my gut was like, this is crazy. This is an attack. But after looking to the Emmanuel Macron thing, they've kept secrets. I don't see any, like, I can't say I believe that I believe that Michelle Obama is a man, because I have never seen a single shred of proof of that. What I'm saying is that rather than just dispelling everybody as crazy, I would at least like to look into it and then say, actually, I don't think she's a man. What about you? I don't, did you look into it? Like,
I've looked into it a bit. I've seen some photos. I watched Tucker's interview with the one guy who had claimed to slept with Obama on several occasions.
Gay. I believe that.
I think that is definitely plausible.
Yeah, I mean, the Daily Mail even wrote, like, they published his letters recently. He definitely, and he wrote about to his friend about his homosexual feelings, that those letters are now public and available. Obama's gay. That I believe.
I think it might have been too much of a risk factor at the time where we were in politics. Like, I think when Obama was elected, he was anti-gay marriage, for instance. So I think for him to be married to a man was probably risky if that ever came out, and could lose him a lot of votes. But I don't know. It's an interesting one. I do think Obama might be gay, though.
He is. Take that to the bank. I mean, the Daily Mail published the piece, and they never came after the Daily Mail. That was very recent, and I read it, and Obama's without question a gay man. People that have slept with him, I mean, there's no question he's a gay man, which still would be, by the way, blackmail. Like when he tells that story about how he did, that guy alleges that he did crack with Barack Obama, which Barack Obama admitted to doing drugs in the past in his book, but that would be blackmail that you would have. And so there are a lot of politicians that are in positions of power that I believe to be gay men. Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron definitively is a gay man. Again, also the people that had affairs with him have spoken out in France. And Barack Obama is definitely a gay man. That I can say with certainty. I've looked into that.
So I do want to talk more about Project MK Ultra and the brainwashing. So I have a friend. He's a very good hypnotist, one of the best in the world. And when I had him on the podcast, I was asking about how maybe he'd been approached or other hypnotists he knew about using that for evil. And the number one thing that he said was the use case was brainwashing children into doing mass shootings. Now, I know that someone had asked you about this on a previous podcast, and that was a conspiracy that you didn't really touch into, but it seems to fall perfectly in line with kind of what you've already been saying. I know Alex Jones faced like insidious backlash because of his claims about Sandy Hook. Do you think that those kids are brainwashed?
Without question. And that's why I said knowing what is in their medicine cabinet is they all have the same look in their eye. If you go and you look at all of these shooters, what is the one from a couple of days ago? Matthew Crooks. And you look at Adam Lanza referring to Sandy Hook as you're referring to, you can obviously see in their eyes that they're almost like not there. And
they kind of look like someone on LSD.
Yeah, someone that's been drugged. And actually what's actually really compelling is when you read that book, Chaos, you learn that Charles Manson was taught hypnotist techniques. So he was taught how to hypnotize people. He was a federal asset. There's no question about that. That you can even look on MK Ultra on Wikipedia and it lists Charles Manson as being affiliated with the program. And so that's very scary. So if the government can drug people and induce them to commit murders, and that part is a fact, then of course everything becomes plausible. And so that's why I say you have to confront the evil of what the government has done in the past, the stuff that is factual, that is documented in the FOIA requests, which this book takes you through. It took this man 22 years to write this book because he had to wait. And the government always, in the retrospect, will like slowly drop documents. And it takes someone like a Tom O'Neill to wait 22 years so that you can put together a trove and show people how insane and psychopathic. I mean, the CIA has killed CIA agents in experiments. They would just drop LSD into their cups, trying to induce them into a psychosis because they were obsessed with controlling minds. Like 60s was the decade where they experimented with controlling minds, which is why I don't trust anything came out of the 60s, the moon landing being one of them. The same year that the Charles Manson murders happened, they also did the moon landing. So they were like also plotting an entire mass psychosis over here in LA with these murders that took place, but they were above board on the moon landings. Like it's completely crazy to think that. You have to be a conspiracy theorist to read through that book and know what our government was up to and what programs were in place. And then to come out of it being like, oh, but like their one thing they had to do was like totally above board. I don't believe it. If
you had to give a percentage, Candace, what percentage of mass shootings do you think are a result of this type of brainwashing?
So I now want to look into it. And so I'm at the beginning of that journey because I only read Chaos in April.
Yeah.
And it completely broke my brain in the right ways. Like I had to kind of be shattered for me to be able to go, okay, this is all plausible. I thought all of this could not be possible, but now I'm actually reading this, looking into these government programs, recognizing that all of this is real. And that's why I said I want to go back and I want to revisit all of these huge things that happened, because there are incentives. So you say, why did the Charles Manson murders? Like, why would they do that? Why would they want people to believe that these hippies, even though the CIA was there that night, allegedly killed this beautiful actress who the world loved? What would be the mass psychosis that followed? The hippie dream stopped immediately. People were against war. They were like, no, they were boycott. We don't want people going to war. Overnight, people stopped with hippie communes, started locking their doors, and were just like ripped into a new reality.
And we went to war right after.
War.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the entire time of the moon landings, by the way, when did we stop going to the moon? Well, the guy who did that pamphlet said, it's just interesting. Like every time they were conducting these programs and we were in Vietnam and Cambodia and bombing people, they were like, oh, looky over here. Nothing's landing.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting.
Reviewing your story over the past few years, many in the political sphere have been enthralled by the idea of you running for president. I think the most recent was George Janko's podcast. You stated that you hate Washington, no longer interested. One of your core ideologies is to kind of ensure your family's safety before ensuring your neighbor's safety. And I think you think that way about your country, and of course, your family yourself. But being a new mother, do you feel as though one day, if your kids and family are kind of taken care of, safe, good shape, do you think you would run for president for the greater good?
I never say never, because I know that you make plans and then God laughs. So whatever is God's will for me will happen in the future. If you asked me today, I would say that I would not run for president because I think that I can impact culture more. Like I think these discussions are more important than the performance of politics, and that very much it has become a performance. Very little gets done all the time. But once the people are awakened, much will get done because people will know what to look for. People will make different demands. So it's all about changing culture. I think politics is downstream from culture and faith is upstream from politics.
Where do you think you can change culture the most? Like in what position? Is it a capital game? Is it an influence game?
What do you mean by that?
Like, do you think you would have to have billions of dollars to really make the impact you want to make? Or do you think you would just have millions of followers, millions of views?
Like I'm doing it right now. I think we are doing it right now. All it's going to take are people that are watching this, and you're going to get a percentage of them. I think it's all crazy. You're going to get some journalists that go, oh my gosh, freaking out because they're on the payroll of the CIA and they got to write articles about this discussion. The overwhelming majority are going to be interested, and they're going to just Google Van Allen Bell or Google something. It only takes one thing to go, okay, she's right about that, and then it will grow by itself. So I'm all about just like spreading the seeds. And I think that's how we impact culture, by having the courage to have the discussions, having the courage to walk away from those big sponsorships and those red carpets that would come and those magazine covers that would come. If I had only just said Black Lives Matter and peddled all the leftist talking points and said the government can save us from COVID and stay at home, save lives, I'm good. I want people to wake up to the tyranny that's happening right now, because I think we have a very small window of opportunity to reverse it.
Are you worried about being deplatformed?
I expect at some point to be deplatformed, and we're already building in the background. I am blessed to have Tucker Carlson as someone that I can look up to see what he's done. He's probably the only person in media that I genuinely look up to. Like, I just think he's amazing. And they did stuff to Tucker. Obviously, he got fired. He was speaking truth. He didn't peddle the lines about the Ukraine war, which means he stood up to the military-industrial complex, and that's when you got to go. Same for me, stood up to the military-industrial complex, and that's when you got to go. But to see him as an independent voice inspires me. And to see how he built his own platform also inspires me. So we're already building all that in the background, as I said, expecting. But I also know that the people are with me. And when you have the people, you have everything. And they're cheering me on. They have had my back, and I really am nothing without my supporters.
Candace, I want to give some context to this question. So, do you think your voice matters more because you're a Black woman? And here's the context. I believe even if something isn't logically true or shouldn't be true, if it gets results, that kind of makes it true. For example, a woman's opinion on abortion matters more because people believe it does. You've made a career for yourself off this idea. Because only when a Black woman calls out Black culture, BLM, police injustice, do people really start to listen. So do you think agency matters? And if it does, is it even helpful to push the ideology that it shouldn't?
So first and foremost, there's always going to be something that helps you in your career, because there's going to be something that sets you apart from other people. And there is no doubt that I was one of the only Black people, even if there were Black people that thought it, that was willing to say it about BLM in 2016 when like things were on fire. So of course that grabbed headlines because people hated me. Like there was like, and so the hate that I received, like I should have just been able to say, Black people don't have to be Democrats and been left alone. But this was like existential to the Democrat Party. This was existential to Black America for a Black American not to view themselves as a victim. And so the media attacked me in a way that actually helped me. You know, their attacks spotlighted me. And so there's no question that being a Black person saying something that was different from the majority of Black people separated me, I think, from the masses. Now, how would it have impacted my career? Well, I think I would have actually made a lot more money if I had just said
definitely.
the thing.
You would have won presidency already.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But, you know, it definitely got me a lot of headlines.
So if agency does matter, do you think it should matter? And do you think we should push ideologies to where certain groups of people, like their voice shouldn't matter more than others on various topics?
No, I think just saying what makes sense. But by the way, I want to be clear. It wouldn't have mattered. It mattered because I was Black. But if a white person had had the courage to say it too, they would have also gone viral. So if you would have been the lone white person that said, I am standing up to BLM, I mean, it was so institutionalized that any voice, it actually didn't matter what color you were. Any person that said anything against BLM was getting crazy headlines because how dare you, right? So did it matter? Yeah, it caused a lot of headlines. Would it matter if I was a white person saying, I probably would have gotten more headlines if I was a white person saying I didn't agree with BLM and more of an attempt to cancel my life, which they tried to do because I didn't agree with BLM. But no, it was me that got me further by committing to what I believed and standing by it and not being fearful of cancel culture. So what you need, the ingredients, not about agency, it's about audacity.
I like that. Candace, what group in society do you believe is being the most irresponsible?
Irresponsible. Are we talking about American society, worldwide? Are we talking race? Are we talking?
It could be anything. Yeah. Is there a certain group of people?
It's a lot of people, heathens in general. Actually, I couldn't pinpoint it because I could talk to you. I could tell you how every group is being problematic in a different way.
Yeah.
I think that the LGBTQ community is probably the most problematic me because what the ideas that they're fostering, in my view, inevitably are leading to the softening of pedophilia because we're starting to see.
Do you believe being trans is a fetish?
Yes. It's a fetish and it's also in part a mental disorder. So yes, some trans people have autogynephilia. Some trans people have gender dysphoria. And the problem is that society is institutionalizing this and pretending that this is just the way that they're born rather than addressing that issue as it should be addressed, which is you're disordered. Like something's out of whack here. Something's happened here.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm one of those people that just
says that.
Is there
any other incentive structure for the government to push LGBT ideals besides depopulation?
Yes, everything. And once you wake up again to the Christ conspiracy, and I said this to someone a couple of days ago, I've done so many interviews, I'm forgetting, but I just said, isn't it interesting that Hollywood, they just don't agree with the Bible on anything. There's not even one thing about it. It's like always the exact opposite of the Bible. You know, like marriage between a man and a woman. No, it can be between a turtle and a fish. You're like, okay, can we agree that like men and women are different? No, actually, they can be the exact same person. And so it's very obvious that they're quite literally conspiring against Christ, you know? And that would mean that you've got to fight family, right? And if you're ever looking to see what attaches all of these insane leftist ideas, it's all an attack on the family because family is godly, right? And so they're attacking the nuclear family because they know that once you break down the family, the state gets stronger, right? Like when there is no family to sit you around the dinner table and have a mom and a dad and providing you that foundation and that base, which again is godly, then these kids go out into the world, they're lost. And what they will find inevitably is more governance, right? They will pursue that paternity and that maternity in all of the wrong places. This is like, you know, Marxist, Karl Marx 101.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you believe it's racist to assume a white woman who has slept with several black men would not make a good partner?
Well, I don't get how the race even comes into a factor. Like, I think what we should talk about in general is whether or not women that are sleeping with a ton of men could become good partners? The answer is yes, they can.
Hmm.
You can always change, right? Just because you were living this way does not mean that you can't live a different way in the future. But if a woman has the perspective that this promiscuity is a good thing, then I think that men have a right to say, I don't think that you're going to be a good partner, right?
That makes sense.
One evil spells the next evil, spells the next evil. Evil really is a slippery slope.
By that same token, should a man be careful dating a woman that has several gay friends?
Are you talking like we're using gay as in like male gay friends?
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
I instinctually said yes there. And it's just on the basis of what I've seen. Gay men can be quite catty. And I just find that when a woman has a ton of gay male friends, it just signifies something about the woman and I haven't thought through this. But
what do you
yes,
think it
I would list
signifies?
that as a pink flag, as they say. Yeah.
What do you think it signifies? I think most gay men would agree that there's definitely more of a hookup culture within
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Definitely more promiscuity.
Mhm.
Is that probably what you're thinking, or is
Yeah, but
it?
there's also a cattiness there. And I
There's
just think,
liberal ideals as well.
right, exactly. And there's a cattiness there. And, you know, because homosexuals do believe in there is a lot of perversion in the gay community. They have as many partners as possible. There's nothing preventing them from sleeping with each other 26 times a day. You know, the sex drive of two men is very different. And that's why I say sin is a slippery slope. And I think that when a woman, if that's who you're getting your feedback from, let's just say any circle, who is your circle of friends, right?
Yeah.
You will become the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And so if you're telling me that her average is being impacted by being surrounded by homosexual men, yeah, that's going to have an impact, you know?
It's interesting. Candace, I do want to end on a higher note. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Well, that is one of it. You will become the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. That is so real. Like, take that to the bank. Literally look around right now and say, who am I spending the most time with? And know that you're either bringing your average up or you're bringing your average down. I love being the dumbest person in the room because I'm like, I'm bringing my average up here. I'm learning so much. And if you're around, 5 women and all they want to do is drink and party and talk about how men ain't shit, you will become the average. And you don't want that do not want to become that average. So take care of your surroundings. The second piece of advice I would give to people is God is real. And everything that is happening in your society right now is everything that you feel that is falling apart. The fabric that is being unwoven in the tapestry, so to speak, is because people who were sheer evil and very much believe and were committed to the principles of Satanism have established the society that you live in. These people believed in deities, they worshiped Satan. So if you are fighting this spiritual battle right now and you don't know that God is real, you are essentially unarmed in this battle right now. The Bible is the first book that you should be reading. Come to terms with what evil is, come to terms with what goodness is, and know that goodness leads to more goodness and evil leads to more evil. And the last thing I want to say, because this is probably the most important thing, you can change who you are. I feel that a lot of people want to take a step. They know that the way that they're living is not right, but they're fearful. There's this fear that, well, I was yesterday down saying #MeToo and I had a pussy hat on my head as they were terming them and screaming about Trump. I can't just change my mind today. You can. And what will naturally happen is you will lose a lot of your friends. There will be this shedding. Again, we talked about this. Like it's hard to go through it when you're going through it. But when you come out of that on the other side, the reward for going through that hard change, for going through that metamorphosis is resounding. Like you will see your whole reality will shift and it will be one that's based in goodness rather than one that's based in evil. So have the courage to change and know that you can.
And you have no idea how good it can get as well. I think that's what stops a lot of people from changing anything in general. They don't really see how positive their life can be. I guess the last one, you mentioned Tucker earlier being someone you look up to in the social media sphere, but Who's the most impressive person you've ever met?
My husband, without question, I would say my husband, which is why I married him 18 days after meeting him.
18 days?
18 days after laying eyes, meeting each other, we got engaged. Pardon, not married. We got engaged 18 days later because he's the most impressive person that I've ever met. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, he put me on the path to my faith journey. He's absolutely brilliant. He studied theology overseas. My husband's from the UK. And I never understood, like, why would you like pick theology as your quote unquote major? They don't call it a major. And now I see why. He was like, because you have to understand faith to know what drives everything in the world. And I didn't understand what he meant by that. But I have been impressed by what faith has done in his life. He's also brilliant. He's like a financial guru. And I just think my husband is like the most impressive person in the world.
Is there one characteristic that he has that you really wish to instill like in your life?
Yeah, he is. I mean, when you're in a marriage, you're a yin and you're a yang. And so I think if I implemented him in me, it wouldn't work.
Exactly. Yeah.
But he's probably the only person I know that knows how to like change my mind without changing my mind.
He wins the debates.
He wins without winning. You know, he knows how I tick.
Yeah.
And so he is kind of the person that just like will kind of quietly push like, oh, here's a book that you might want to read. And then suddenly I'm being driven and I realize, wait a second, you won this debate in the end and I did not understand.
It makes you feel as though it's your idea, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Or that I arrived at it naturally. And I guess I did, but he knows how I tick and he knows how to get me there without pushing because he knows that I don't like being pushed into something. And so he's just figured me out, which is not good for me, but it is good for me because that's how I came to the Catholic faith. That's how I came to recognizing that it was intentional to divide even the religions in America, like to so many Protestant faiths. Satanists did that. Satanists promoted that. And a lot of evangelicals don't know that. And so I didn't understand why he converted from the Anglican Church to Catholicism while he was at Oxford. And then once I got into history and I realized the Christ conspiracy, the things that were not told, like we bombed Nagasaki, we dropped it, on a Catholic church. In school, they don't tell us why we picked Nagasaki. And yet we dropped a nuclear bomb and wiped out the entire Catholic population. Same in Dresden. We hear about the firebombing and they say like that was a war crime, but they don't tell you on Ash Wednesday, they incinerated Christians. So revisit history and all the wars that we've had through the lens of a holy war. And the scales, you're going to be like, oh my gosh. And then you realize that the Catholics were always standing up to the Satanists. And I now know that it was all about dividing the one holy apostolic Christian church. And so I don't war with Christians anymore. And when I'm tempted to, like, even this is why I have had what is considered to be a radical perspective on Putin and Russia. I'm like, oh, another strong Christian country. And you're trying to propagandize us like Edward Bernays did to see them as Nazis and literally Hitler. That's propaganda that is intentionally, we were given those triggers in the classroom so that we instantly agree to people getting bombed. Those are Christians. You're not going to make me believe that those Russian boys who are being signed up for the war are not human, and the media can't control my psyche on that. I will not comply with the idea that Russians should be dehumanized because those are my Christian brethren.
Well, Candace, I'm excited to see a crash course from you on history in the next couple years. Is there anything that no one's asked you recently that you want to talk about? Or
no,
do you think
I actually want to know what was your turnaround. I'm going to ask you a question because I think people are probably interested. So you say you first were making videos about true crime and you felt fearful about having a conservative voice on. What was the thing that you saw here in Hollywood, or what was the shift in you? Because I think the Holy Spirit is working all across the world, like Russell Brand being brought into the church. There's just something happening where I think people are feeling something spiritually. So I'm interested in your transformation.
Well, it's kind of been forced, I'll say. Maybe that was divine intervention. But I started this podcast because I didn't want to focus on such negativity with serial killers anymore. I wanted to get people's stories. And I found that through the lens of people's stories, they often learn lessons. And many of those lessons are politically opinionated. And yeah, I do think it's unfair to only bring on the right. I think it's unfair to only bring on the left. But I'm glad to promote both perspectives and let people decide who they think has the more logical arguments and who they think has the ones that will benefit their life the most. So, yeah. Candace Owens, this has been the Jack Neel Podcast. Where can people find you?
You guys can find me, if you want to support independent journalism, locals.com, if you would like to contribute to what I'm doing. I also just launched my TikTok, which I'm very excited about. I was such a boomer trying to post my first TikTok post, like, the girls do like the makeup thing. And I felt like such a grandma, but I did it. So at Candace O Show, it's me. I'm a TikToker now. Follow me there. Yeah, I need to, you know what?
Are you going to do the Tyler dance?
What's that?
The Tyler dance?
I don't even know what that is.
Well, I think the audience would love it.
I'm like a millennial boomer, I think, or something. Yeah. The Tyler dance. You gotta show me what it is. I'm doing it. I'm cool. I'm a cool mom.
Love it, Candace. Awesome. Well, thank you guys.